Hi, my name is Carol Baskin, and I am the founder and CEO of Big Cat Rescue. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about the formation of the Big Cat Coalition. And you've probably never heard of us because we aren't a formal group, but when I tell you a little bit more about us, I hope that you will understand what has been going on behind the scenes and want to get involved with us. If it seems rather late to be discussing these coalitions, it's because we have to be as stealthy as a cat in order to do what we need to do to protect the big cats and not have the wild animal or wildcat abusers thwart our mission. There are lots of exciting things that are going on behind the scenes right now that we can't talk about for that very reason. But for now, we have achieved many of our goals, and it's time to give credit where credit is due. So here is a timeline that actually started with the International Tiger Coalition. And this is being told from my perspective. I am a small player in this big group of wonderful nonprofits, and there may be people that are working behind the scenes that I have left out because I don't know about the work that they're doing. So I'm certainly open to editing this and including anything more that they bring to me. But what happened was in 2007, there was a loose coalition of NGOs who began working together, and they had achieved some pretty unprecedented goals by 2009 when Big Cat Rescue joined the coalition. Judy Mills, I love Judy Mills. Judy Mills was the facilitator for our monthly and sometimes weekly meetings. And these meetings were done by phone because these nonprofits are based all around the world. In 2009, I represented Big Cat Rescue and attended the launch of the World Bank's involvement in Washington, D.C., which was emceed by Harrison Ford and attended by Bo Derek and John Duvall and some other celebrities. The coalition's initial goal was to stop tiger farming in China and to increase the wild tiger population to 10,000 animals by the next year of the tiger. If you don't remember, 2009 was the year of the tiger, so the idea was to double the number of tigers in the wild by the next year of the tiger. Big Cat Rescue joined in the International Tiger Coalition to ensure that these groups considered the fact that cub handling in the United States was exacerbating the poaching in range states, and it was giving China an excuse to farm tigers for their parts, since breeders in America farm them for cub handling. China was saying, at least we know where our tigers are, and we can't even say that in the United States because we have such poor regulation and enforcement of what a small patchwork of laws that we have. In 2010, Big Cat Rescue sponsored the International Tiger Coalition's booth at the CITES meeting and sponsored the attendance of the ITC, International Tiger Coalition's moderator, Judy Mills, at the Tiger Summit in St. Petersburg, Russia. Not St. Petersburg, Florida, St. Petersburg, Russia. In 2010, Big Cat Rescue sponsored the International Tiger Coalition booth in Doha, Qatar. And we did that with the money that we got from the Chase Chase contest, where a lot of our Facebook fans voted for us, and we won $25,000. So we spent a good portion of that to help save tigers in the wild. In 2011, the Big Cat Rescue made introductions to Rose Church of members of the International Tiger Coalition, and that's what formed the Big Cat Coalition. And so I'll talk to you a lot more about that. That started on April the 4th, 2011. Rose Church, who was a pro bono attorney for Ian Somerhalder Foundation, contacted Big Cat Rescue and asked what Ian Somerhalder could do to help Tony the tiger be saved from the truck stop in Grosstet, Alabama. Ian Somerhalder is the star of Vampire Diaries, and he's from Louisiana, and he had a Twitter following of 2.3 million fans at that time. Right now, when I'm recording this, which is January the 18th, 2014, he has over 4 million Twitter followers. So getting him to get the word out was really important. We had been working to save Tony from the truck stop since 2009, and so had the Animal Legal Defense Fund. And unfortunately, there just wasn't anything more that could be done at the time because those things drag out for years, and the owner has continued to file appeal after appeal, knowing that it will drag out the ultimate outcome. So Howard Baskin, my husband, and I suggested to Rose that if Ian really wanted to help make a difference for big cats, what we needed him to do was help us stop the cub petting or cub handling. Rose is from up north, or the Northeast, and she just could not even believe that that kind of abuse actually existed in this country, where people would pay to pose with lion and tiger cubs, or they would pay to handle them in malls and flea markets and roadside zoos. And so she contacted her law professor, Diane Sullivan, to see what could be done. And they thought of bringing together the big nonprofits who work on big cat issues. And they wanted to bring them together for a roundtable discussion about what we could all do together to end this crisis. So she asked me if I knew anybody that I could suggest. Well, there were like 40 members at that time, I believe, of the International Tiger Coalition, and we were all very interested in saving tigers. And by this time, the coalition all were very well versed in why cub handling was causing the extinction of tigers. So I gave her the list of all of the people that I had been working with there who had been most active and who had really been trying to make a difference for the cats. She worked with, Rose worked with the people over at the International Fund for Animal Welfare. And I remember she had some connection to them, but I can't recall exactly how she knew them, but I think she knew them before she met me. Anyway, she worked with them, she took the list that I gave them, and they all sat down and figured out, okay, here's the people we want to invite to a meeting in Washington, D.C. at the International Fund for Animal Welfare. And this meeting took place on July 25th, 2011. The attendees who were there at that time was Stephen Otto from the Animal Legal Defense Fund, Howard and Carol Baskin from Big Cat Rescue, Adam Roberts and Tracy Coppola from Born Free, and since then Tracy has moved over and has started working for the International Fund for Animal Welfare, Patty Finch from the Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries, Debbie Leahy from the Humane Society of the United States, Jeff Flocken, Nathan Hirschler, and Gina Miller, who was an intern at the time for the International Fund for Animal Welfare, Rose Church, of course, who was the pro bono attorney for the Ian Somerhalder Foundation, Dean Diane Sullivan from the Massachusetts School of Law. She was also there to film the people that came because she was putting together a documentary that was later called The Plight of Tigers. And if you go to the show notes page here, it's bigcatrescue.org/big-cat-coalition. You'll see the video. The World Council for Animal Rights, the Wildcat Conservation Legal Aid Society, and Lee Henry from the World Wildlife Fund. If you consider the number of supporters that just these organizations had, we represented 18 million people who really care about big cat issues. So this was the biggest group ever to be working on a U.S. issue together. And, you know, we went into this without big expectations. The International Tiger Coalition had been a wonderful group of people, but it had been very hard sometimes to deal with larger organizations because the bigger an organization gets, the slower moving, the more layers of red tape, the more issues you have with, you know, who owns this finished product. And so we were not expecting that this roundtable was going to have a huge effect, but we were amazed. Everybody who came was really committed to ending the abuse, figuring out what the things were that we most needed to target to end the abuse of so many big cats. And they were just a unique group of individuals from those organizations too. As we were figuring out what those different things were that we were going to have to do to fix this problem, we would set up task committees for each one, and everybody wanted to be on every task committee. So it was really great to see that there was so much enthusiasm, so much professionalism. Everyone in this group has worked so nicely together, and it's really achieved so much for the cats. And so that's why I couldn't talk about it when it was happening, but now that so many of these things have happened and are now just in a waiting phase, I thought it would be great to talk a little bit more about it. In August 22 of 2011, after the group met with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service about the generic tiger issue, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service finally put it on the Federal Register for public comment. Now, what that means is for 30 days, the public can come in and comment on whether or not they thought that the generic tiger loophole should be rescinded. And there's pages on our website that talk more about what that was, but essentially what happened is that many years ago, it became so popular to inbreed tigers to create white tigers that many of the tiger cubs were being born dead because of all of the inbreeding. So what the zoo started doing, and the backyard breeders, is they started crossbreeding Bengal tigers to Siberian tigers. And that way they could introduce that deleterious gene from the Bengal tiger to the Siberian tiger and get white cubs that were surviving. But the more they do it, of course, the more inbred they get, and then the lower the survival rate. And there's just no good reason to be breeding white tigers in the first place. But it was happening. And it was happening so much that usually when you breed endangered species like that, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service requires permits. So when a legitimate accredited zoo wants to breed purebred tigers, they have to get permits from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to do that. But there were so many people that were inbreeding and crossbreeding these cats that serve no conservation value that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service said, we're going to call those generic tigers, and you don't have to get a permit for those because those aren't real tigers. Well, what happened is I just opened the floodgate for every Tom, Dick, and Harry to be breeding tigers in their backyard, which is what got us into this mess in the first place. And so we've been asking the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to rescind this loophole that they created, and it's been referred to as the generic tiger loophole. So anyway, finally, in August of 2011, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service agreed that this was wrong. You shouldn't be breeding and inbreeding all of these animals and doing it without having to get permits. So they put it out for public comment, and they got over 14,000 comments in support of our position, which is to stop that unregulated breeding of tigers. And you'll see that there's a big jump from August of 2011 until January of 2012 in the show notes that I have here. But that's because that's when we were doing all of the work. We were meeting on the phone every 2 weeks, sometimes every week. We were sending back and forth hundreds and hundreds of emails. We were building huge charts, trying to document, because there's no government agency that does this, we were trying to document where are the tigers that we know about, and we limited most of our research to tigers. Because in 2004, the USDA had asked their licensees, how many tigers do you have? Well, it was based on the honor system, and it only included USDA licensed facilities. So people that were pet owners, they didn't have a USDA license, so they weren't included. And back then, they found that there were like almost 5,000 tigers in USDA facilities. So I started keeping a chart. And every year, whenever I hear a news report that says so-and-so was in the news and they have 140 tigers, then I update the news. I update it based on the news reports because there just aren't any good counts. USDA sometimes has a census that they post from different licensees when they do inspections, but we have found that these numbers are just ridiculously off. Places that I know have 300 tigers don't show up at all. People that openly claim that they have 140, 190 tigers may show 70 tigers on their USDA list. So it was a huge ordeal trying to figure out where are all of these tigers, keeping a list of them. And then the other thing that we needed to be able to prove is how big is this problem? How many of these cubs are actually being born every year for the purpose of being used as cub handling props? And so we were able to figure that out by going online to Flickr and YouTube and Blip TV and Vimeo and all of these other places where people post their photos, Facebook, people posting photos of them posing with tigers or videos of them posing with tigers. And then we would have to look at the dates on each one of those and figure out, okay, well, we saw that there were 20 different people that all posted right around the same time that they were handling a cub at this one facility. So it was probably just one cub. We can't say that it was 20 cubs because it makes more sense that it was just one cub being handled by all these different people. And so we built out this amazingly complex chart. And big shout out to you, Gina, if you're watching this, because she was the intern who worked with me the most on putting all of this information together. And what we discovered at the end of it is that very conservatively, we could say that there were about 200 cubs being bred every year for cub handling. And the cub handling at that time was happening mostly in malls. There were a couple of traveling acts that were going around. They'd set up on the weekend, let people handle the cubs all weekend, and they would do it for $25 per photo. So it wasn't a ton of money, but there were so many people doing it because they didn't know any better that it was proving to be a pretty lucrative business. But the thing was, the USDA had two separate things going on. They had a cub handling fact sheet or tiger handling fact sheet that said you shouldn't handle what they called juvenile tigers, and some of their other inspections showed that these juvenile tigers were 12 weeks. So you shouldn't handle tigers or big cats after they're 12 weeks old. We later found another court case that actually was even won on appeal, the USDA's position that a cub who was 8 weeks old was too young to be held. So what that essentially did was it created an 8-week to 12-week window. And if you're in the business of charging people to pet cubs, that means these breeders and dealers were breeding cubs every month to have usable cubs. And that is where those 200 cubs a year were coming from. So, you know, when the group first got together in 2011 in July, the coalition, the first thought was our problem is the private sector and the private ownership of big cats. But it's not really the private owners that are the problem. It's the breeders and dealers who use all these cubs and then either sell them very cheaply, a couple $100 for a used 12-week-old cub, or even will give the cubs away just so that they don't have the burden of a $10,000 a year liability, because that's what it costs us to take care of these big cats. So from August of 2011 until January of 2012, that's what we were doing. We were gathering all of this information. We were drafting and redrafting and redrafting how we thought the federal bill should look, how we thought the letter to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service should look, how we thought the petition to USDA to ban the cub handling under the current rules, the Animal Welfare Act. We all believe, all of us in the coalition believe that USDA already has the right to ban cub handling because it is an egregious abuse of the cubs and mothers. And so putting that together in a way that it just made it a foregone conclusion. You can't read this petition and not agree that nobody should be breeding cubs for cub handling purposes. So that's what we were doing for those few months. And then in January of 2012, we actually went in, the whole coalition did, and we met with the USDA to present our findings. Each one of the coalition members took whatever was their strength and did their part of the presentation. So for us, as you guys know, if you're watching this, our videos over at Big Cat TV are our biggest strength. And so we put together a video of a lot of the abuse, certainly not all of it, but a lot of the abuse that we have been able to capture on film. And you could see the members of USDA who were watching this, and these were the very highest level people sitting around the table, and they brought in a bunch of people, and they even brought in more of their people on the phone that couldn't be there in person. But the ones who were watching this video, you could see that they got it. They understood. They had been told by these stakeholders that it wasn't so bad, that these cubs need this, that they love this, and all of that nonsense. And now they could see for themselves just how horrid it was. So we presented that. In February 29 of 2012, Representative McKeon and Representative Sanchez introduced the Big Cats and Public Safety Protection Act in the House, and that was H.R. 4122. And then Senator Kerry said that he would commit to introducing it in the Senate, which he did just prior to the elections. March 2nd, 2012, Ian Somerhalder was tweeting about all of this to his fans and getting them in support of the Big Cats and Public Safety Protection Act. March 28th of 2012, the Massachusetts School of Law won a Bronze Telly Award for the Plight of Tigers film, the one I said that she filmed when we all got together that day in July. The day we got together in July, we didn't know how any of us were going to do this. We didn't know how we would work together. But after the meeting, she called in each of us to come in, well, not each of us, but a lot of us to come in and talk to her on film. And then she put together this great documentary called The Plight of Tigers, and then won this Bronze Telly Award in March of 2012. In July of 2012, the Humane Society of the United States had their Taking Action for Animals conference, and Big Cat Rescue was the diamond sponsor, which was the largest sponsor of that event. And we did that because by this time we were really clear that we can save 6 or 7 cats a year as our older cats die here, but these kinds of laws will save thousands, if not tens of thousands of animals. So that's where we knew we had to reach those people at the conference. As part of being a diamond sponsor, they allowed us to do presentations. And so Howie did a great video presentation to the entire audience, and then they break out into workshops. And so he presented to 1 or 2 of the workshops, and so did I. And so in mind, what I wanted to do was to tell people how one person can make a difference. And that one person was Rose Church, the pro bono attorney for the Ian Somerhalder Foundation. And pro bono means she works for free. So this is what I'm going to give you next is the presentation that I did that day. And what I did was I asked everybody how many people had heard of Tony the tiger who had been stuck in the truck stop in Louisiana for the past decade. And of course, in the animal protection industry, everybody knows about that poor tiger. And of course I asked, well, who recognizes Ian Somerhalder from the Vampire Diaries? And everybody, well, all the young girls anyway, knew who he was. Rose Church is a pro bono attorney for the Ian Somerhalder Foundation, and she wanted to get Ian involved in freeing Tony the tiger. Ian has 2,300,000 followers on Twitter, and she thought that getting him to tweet about Tony might help raise awareness about Tony the truck stop tiger. She contacted me to ask what Ian's could ask his followers to do. Even though we get more complaints about Tony than any other single situation, and we've been working to free him for the past decade, we had exhausted our ability to do anything. We had hired a tiger, we had hired the tiger lawyer, and had shown up with plenty of supporters to testify, but it had become obvious that the state of Louisiana was not going to do anything for that tiger. USDA has revoked the license to display the tiger, but that rarely seems to stop exhibitors from exhibiting. The Animal Legal Defense Fund had continued the fight in the only venue left, which was the legal system. Court cases wind their way through the system like a river of molasses, so there wasn't much anyone could do. It seemed like the whole world already knew about Tony, so having Ian tweet his audience didn't seem like a terribly productive thing to do. If we had the help of a celebrity, we told Rose we could make a far bigger impact for thousands of tigers like Tony by educating his fan base about the issue that causes so many tigers and other big cats to end up being bred, exploited, and discarded. The underlying cause for almost all of this suffering is cub handling. I explained to Rose that it was big business in the U.S. for breeders, and there's only a handful of them, but they make a lot of money, to charge the public to pet or pose with big cat cubs. One claims to have made $23,000 in a single weekend at a mall, charging people to have interaction with cubs and or to have their photos made with the cubs. The breeders and dealers were doing these pay-to-play sessions with older lions and tigers up until the death of a high school student named Haley Hildebrand. Thanks to pressure from the media and the public, the USDA issued a frequently asked questions fact sheet suggesting that cubs under the age of 8 weeks should not be used this way. And the reason for that is when cubs are born in captivity, they are vaccinated just like cats are for all of the same viruses that kill cats. And those vaccines usually start at 8 weeks, 12 weeks, and 16 weeks. So the cub isn't even protected until 16 weeks. In a separate appellate court case, the judge ruled, this is a USDA judge, ruled that cubs over the age of 12 weeks were too dangerous for such interaction. So if you think about it, if you shouldn't even handle them until they're 16 weeks and they're too dangerous at the age of 12 weeks, there's no window there. The unintended result, though, of them saying that you could do it over 8 weeks and under 12 weeks is that it created a loophole whereby breeders could still charge customers to touch cubs who were between 8 and 12 weeks old. That resulted in massive breeding in order to have profitable cubs to use. Since their shelf life was only 4 weeks, breeders decided to produce lion and tiger and liger cubs every month so that they would always have legal age cubs to use. Rose could hardly believe her ears. First of all, she had never seen those mall exhibits because they mostly happen out in Oklahoma and the Midwest. So she had never seen that, where they set up for 4 days over a long weekend for cubs to be handled around the clock. Second, she couldn't believe that USDA hadn't done something to close that 4-week window already. It can be anything from fixing a broken toy to curing some social ill. Have you ever had one of those moments where you see a situation and you think to yourself, I can fix that? Well, that was Rose's moment. And she said to herself, I can do something about this. Rose figured there are lots of animal protection groups out there. And if they all work together to fix this thing, they could. But she doubted that anyone would listen to her if she made the suggestion that they do so. She took the information to her professor from law school, Diane Sullivan, who was the dean there. And because she knew Dean Diane Sullivan, I have a hard time with that, Dean Diane Sullivan had her own animal law television show and a lot of clout in the animal protection community. She figured that if Dean Sullivan were to ask the big animal groups to come together, that it might actually happen. Rose asked me, who are the big players that care about tigers? And that was an easy question because I had been part of a team of more than 40 organizations who worked together as the International Tiger Coalition. The ITC had been formed primarily to end tiger farming in China, but time and time again, the hurdle was that China would resist our suggestions by pointing out the fact that the U.S. doesn't even know how many tigers we have, nor where they are or how they're being housed. I gave her the names and the contact info for the people who I felt had been most involved in the International Tiger Coalition who could work well together. Rose contacted the International Fund for Animal Welfare and went over the list to get their input on who would be willing to work together on the tiger issue. The result was a roundtable meeting in D.C. at the International Fund for Animal Welfare in July of 2011. At the table were the International Fund for Animal Welfare, the Humane Society of the United States, Born Free, the World Wildlife Fund, the Animal Legal Defense Fund, the Wild Cat Conservation Legal Aid Society, the World Council for Animal Rights, the Dean of the Massachusetts School of Law, Ian Somerhalder Foundation, the Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries, and Big Cat Rescue. Combined, we have over 18 million supporters. I've been part of other animal welfare coalitions, but this group has worked together better than any I have ever seen before. The meeting was hugely successful, and we got to the root of the tiger problem, cub petting. In your conference bags at this Taking Action for Animals conference, we had a 4-page summary of the tiger handling crisis, which again was another big effort that the coalition members worked on and drafted and redrafted and edited and changed the colors and changed the photos and changed everything until it was perfect. There was also another page that we included of citations that were being used for the document, and we had a website set up at bigcatlaws.com as well. What the group concluded was that we can't save wild tigers as long as there is such unregulated trade in captive tigers who provide a legal smokescreen for illegal activities such as poaching. China has made the argument that they should be allowed to farm tigers for their parts to fill the demand, but there will always be a demand for the real tiger, the wild tiger, and expanding the market through farming tigers will only result in them being exterminated more quickly in the wild. Right now, there are more tigers in backyards in America than there are left in the wild. It's thought that there are less than 3,200 tigers left in the wild, and at last count by USDA, there were and that was in 2004, there were about 5,000 tigers in USDA facilities. Only about 200 of those are the legitimate accredited zoos, those zoos that are accredited by the American Zoological Association. So the rest are in these little nasty roadside zoos, circus acts, backyards, and those are just the ones who voluntarily reported and who hold USDA licenses. For those who are not licensed by USDA, the people who own them as pets, there's been no census done. As the group looked at the situation in the U.S., it became apparent that the number one reason that so many tigers end up in deplorable conditions was the very lucrative cub petting industry. Two factors made this abuse possible. Back in the 1980s, white tigers became all the rage, and white tigers would sell for $60,000 because the public was so enamored with seeing a freak of nature. What the zoos kept quiet was the fact that the only way to create that white coat was through purposely inbreeding father to daughter, mother to son, brother to sister. Over time, the cubs became more and more genetically impaired, and they suffered from things like club feet, open spines, crossed eyes, badly formed teeth and bones. Before long, the Bengal tigers were so inbred that they were no longer producing cubs because the cubs were being born dead from the genetic problems that go along with that kind of inbreeding. But the public demanded to see white tigers. So the zoos started hybridizing Bengal tigers, which had this deleterious gene, and Siberian tigers who had not had white cats in their coats. An awful lot of people ignorantly think that the white tiger is a snow tiger or that it lives in areas where it snows, and it's just not true. They weren't even in the Siberian tigers until we started crossbreeding in private hands, the Bengal tigers and the Siberian tigers. So many zoos and backyard breeders were crossbreeding tigers that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service decided it wasn't worth their time to process the captive bred wildlife permits that are required for endangered species. So they created the generic tiger loophole. What this did was it allowed zoos and private owners to breed non-purebred tigers with no oversight, and the tiger population exploded in the United States. The other factor that made it so easy for tigers to be bred and used as photo and petting props was that even though USDA had inadvertently created a 4-week window between 8 and 12 weeks when the cubs could be petted by the public, they had no way to enforce it because they don't require any sort of registration of the cubs or the tigers, and they rely almost entirely on what the tiger owner tells them as to the age of the cub or why the cub was taken from the mother. If I hear one more time that it was orphaned or that it had to be taken from the mother because she rejected it, I am just going to puke because that is such a lie. And people so badly want to believe that stupid lie. I mean, how could that happen 200 times a year? If it's that bad to be breeding tigers in captivity, then just stop it. The same person who claims to make over $20,000 in a good weekend at the mall had 23 tiger cubs die in a span of just over a year. But to date, USDA still hasn't done anything to prosecute him. And that's just the cubs that he's admitted to having died. Who knows how many really did? So the coalition decided on a 3-pronged approach to ending the abuse of tigers. First, close the generic tiger loophole at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Second, ask USDA to close that 4-week window of cub handling. And third, a federal bill that ends the breeding and trade in big cats outside of the zoos that are accredited by the American Zoological Association. Only a year at the time that I did this presentation had passed since that one person, Rose Church, arranged for a bunch of animal protection groups to work together on this. And we had really good news just even a year afterwards. That was that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has put the suggestion of closing the generic tiger exemption on the Federal Register for public comment. And more than 14,000 people responded to that, and almost all of those in favor of closing that generic tiger loophole. We met with the USDA, presented the cub handling crisis flyer, and the citations, and the concurrence of 20 zoo vets who all agreed that cub petting should be banned. Unfortunately, the USDA had taken the position that they do not have the power to close the window. They made it, they should be able to close it. So they were still unwilling, and you'll hear later on that we're still working on that one. For the most part, their attitude seems to be that they don't think the problem is big enough because they don't hear about it that much. And I'm expecting, with the number of people who are reaching out to them now, they are learning otherwise, that there is a huge contingent of animal lovers who do not want to see cubs bred for the purpose of being used as photo and handling props. In March of 2013, our federal bill, H.R. 4122, which was the Big Cats and Public Safety Protection Act, was introduced. It was gaining momentum back then at the time of this presentation, and back then we had 30 plus co-sponsors. You're going to hear a little update on that in a minute. And at that time, Senator Kerry's office was saying that he was working on a companion bill, which he eventually did introduce, but it was right before the elections, so it didn't get a whole lot of traction. These things usually take several years to gain the momentum necessary to be heard in the entire House and Senate, and I'll give you an example. We worked for 6 years, along with other animal protection groups, to get a bill passed back in 2003 that finally became law in December of 2003, and that was called the Captive Wildlife Safety Act. And what that bill did was it made it illegal to sell big cats across state lines as pets. And so even though there were a lot of parameters there, in 2003, when that passed, we had to turn away 312 big cats that year. And we can only take, like I said, 6 or 7 as our older cats die each year. So every other year, the number of big cats who were being abandoned, just the ones that we knew about, was doubling. When that bill passed, the very next year, instead of it being 500 or 600 cats, based on the way the trend was moving, that number dropped, and it dropped for the first time ever to 110. Since then, there have been 9 more states that have passed bans and partial bans, and as a result, those numbers have continued to drop, so that last year, which was 2013, we only had calls to rescue 37 exotic cats, and we were able to rescue 11 of them, I think. So we were able to rescue about 30% of the cats who were in need, whereas 10 years ago we could only rescue 2% of the cats who were in need. And what made the difference isn't the number of cats we take. For the last 10 years, we've averaged 6 or 7 cats a year. So what has made the difference has been better laws to protect these animals and keep the bad guys from breeding them in the first place. The coalition, this again going back to the presentation that I did in 2012, the coalition continues to meet every couple of weeks by phone and to update each other on our progress. We visited with Rose in Boston, and she told us that Ian Somerhalder had met with President Obama. We are hoping that Ian might be able to persuade the president to direct USDA to make it a priority to protect the big cat cubs by closing the cub petting window. In summary, I pointed out that one person can make a difference. Whether you're a young woman like Rose Church, who was donating her time to help a nonprofit, who got huge organizations to all work together as one, or you're a teen idol, can't be a bad job, like Ian, who can manage to reach an audience with the President of the United States. If you fall anywhere in between those two people, you can be a voice for the voiceless. So back to the Big Cat Coalition timeline. By September 2nd, 2012, when I was giving that report, it was in July of 2012. They didn't have a Taking Action for Animals in 2013 because they decided to do it every 2 years. And they're going to be doing it this year, this summer. And Big Cat Rescue, again, is the diamond sponsor because we believe that's the best money we could spend, is helping reach a huge group of people who love animals, who will help us get these laws passed that will protect animals finally. So anyway, September 2nd, 2012, we had started asking people who came on our tours to actually pick up the phone and call their senator and their congressman and tell them that they wanted them to support the Big Cats and Public Safety Act, or if they already were co-sponsors, to thank them so that they knew how important that was. And by this time, we had already gotten 400 people to do that. September the 17th, 2012, Senator John Kerry introduced Senate Bill 3547, which was the companion bill, and it was the Big Cats and Public Safety Act. But unfortunately, that was right before the elections. So, like I said earlier, it just didn't get as much traction as we would really like. It was great, but it wasn't as much as we would have liked. On September the 20th, 2012, Big Cat Rescue and the coalition partners were all part of putting together a congressional briefing to bring Congress members up to speed on what was going on. When the Captive Wild Animal Safety Act passed back in 2003, it passed unanimously. When this bill finally gets heard, I have no doubt that it will pass unanimously. The problem is getting enough attention, enough people to raise enough noise about it so that Congress actually brings it to the floor for a vote. I think just about everybody can agree that tigers should not be kept as backyard pets, that the public should not be allowed to have contact with these cubs, that they should not be bred for that purpose. We all get that. We can all agree on that. Any right-thinking person can agree on that. It's just there's so many other things that Congress deals with that getting this up on their radar enough to take the time to have a vote is our biggest challenge. So, unfortunately, in December 2012, due to the lack of action by the House and the Senate, and largely to do with the fiscal cliff, the Big Cats and Public Safety Act died. But we did not give up. And on March 15th, 2013, Representative Howard Buck McKeon and Representative Loretta Sanchez, the same sponsors from last year, reintroduced the Big Cats and Public Safety Act, and this time it was under the bill number HR 1998. And we got a faster Senate response this year, which was really great. And that was on July the 29th of 2013. Senator Blumenthal picked up the torch, and he reintroduced the Big Cats and Public Safety Act under the bill S-1381. Senator Kerry had been the sponsor before, but Senator Kerry now works in the State Department, which is actually a good thing since he already gets this issue. We're really hoping to be able to utilize that contact there and maybe do some more with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. But on August the 5th of 2013, the USDA posted their request for public comment on our petition. Our petition had been delivered to them, I don't think of this in the timeline, but I think it was like January or February. And it was like a 70-page petition, and that's not like the petition that you sign. Those things are pretty much useless. This was more like a legal brief where we gave all of the legal reasons and all of the citations in what the current law is as to why cub handling is already a violation of the Animal Welfare Act. So we gave that to USDA. USDA could do a couple things. They could throw it in the trash. They could take action on it and ban public contact with big cats. Or they could do what they did, which was put it on the Federal Register and see what the public thinks. And I think, I don't know, but I think that they may have done this hoping that people were going to say, oh no, we should pet cubs. And what they got were 15,000 responses, which primarily said, no, people should not pet cubs. So now they got to wade through all of those, just like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service still needs to wade through their 14,500 comments. And they will divide it all out and chart it and spend just an enormous amount of time of taxpayer dollars doing what they already can see just by doing what I've done, which is read through all of them as they come in and see that the public really opposes cub handling, and they could just ban it. And so that's what we're hoping that they're going to do. The American Zoological Association, they wanted to exempt cheetah handling because they can make money by allowing cheetah contact, and they like to let their donors come in and pet the cheetahs, and so they wanted to extend the amount of time that the USDA took comments in, I believe, the hopes of being able to retain their right to have people pet cheetahs. I think that's a really dumb idea. I'm hoping that the AZA will see from the public comments that it's a really dumb idea and that they will not try to hold on to that. Even if they do, it's not that bad a thing because there just aren't that many cheetahs in captivity. Unfortunately, they too are so inbred that they don't live very long. They rarely end up in private hands. Most of the ones that are in private hands are because people can buy them and import them under the guise of donating to conservation, and in exchange for that you get some cheetah cubs. That happens with jaguars and other cats that are rare in our zoos here, but that's a whole matter for a different day. So that brings us up to now, which is January the 18th, 2014, and Congress is back in session. And so we have the next year, each congressional session is 2 years, so we have the second year of this session to continue to build the co-sponsorship of our bills. We currently have 84 co-sponsors in the House and 5 co-sponsors in the Senate. And if you want to help by getting your lawmaker to sign on, there's a couple of things you can do. On the page, Big Cat Rescue /big-cat-coalition, at the very bottom of the page, there is a link to where you can send an email to your senator or your representative, and it does them both at the same time. So you fill out one form and it's done. But the most important thing that you could do is to give them a call and tell them in person. And you're not going to be talking to the lawmaker. They don't answer their own phones. You'll be talking to a very young aide, and all they're going to want to know is your name, your zip code, and what your issue is, the bill number, which they're on the page here, and what you want them to do. And all you got to say is, I want you to co-sponsor HR 1998, or I want you to co-sponsor S 1381. That's it. It's that easy. And if you are really brave and really want to save cats, set up an appointment and go in and see the aides. That really makes a difference, and you can do it easily. We go to DC to meet with them in Washington frequently, but you can also meet with them in your hometown. Every lawmaker has local areas where they invite their public to come in and talk to them about what's important. And they have people talking to them about healthcare and warfare and everything you can imagine. If they don't hear from you that exotic cat issues are important, then they won't know. So please, if you love big cats and you want to protect big cats, get to know your lawmakers. Get involved. And thank you so much for taking the time to hear me out today. And I really hope that you will contact your lawmakers at catlaws.com. Thank you. Bye-bye.